My MIL stole my newborn and gave her to my cousin as part of a twisted plan. Now, she's in prison, and we're rebuilding our lives. I, 28F, never had a good relationship with my MIL Candace, 58F, from the moment I started dating my now husband James, 30M. She made her disapproval clear right from our first meeting 5 years ago. I remember walking into their huge mansion-like house, nervous but excited to meet James's family. While Philmark, 60M, was welcoming and kind, Candace just looked me up and down and asked James if he was really serious about this one. The dinner that followed was uncomfortable. Candace kept making subtle comments about my middle-class background, how I wouldn't be used to their lifestyle, how different their social circles were, and how James needed someone who could fit in with their wealthy friends. She even asked if I was dating James for his money, right there at the dinner table. James was furious, and we left early that night. Despite Candace's obvious disapproval, James and I got married 3 years ago. She tried to stop the wedding by telling James the first was only after their money and that I would never fit into their world. When that didn't work, she spent the entire wedding planning process making things difficult. She criticized everything from my dress choice to the venue to the food selection. She even tried to convince James to get a prenup 2 days before the wedding, causing a huge fight between them. The real problem started when I got pregnant last year. Candace's niece Rebecca, 32F, had been struggling with infertility for years. Rebecca and her husband Mike had gone through multiple rounds of IVF, but nothing worked. Candace was extremely close to Rebecca, more than she ever was with James or her other children. She had practically raised Rebecca after her sister died in a car accident when Rebecca was just 7. When we announced my pregnancy at a family dinner, everyone was excited except Candace and Rebecca. While others were congratulating us, I noticed them whispering in a corner, giving me strange looks. The next day, Candace showed up at our house unannounced, bringing Rebecca along. They sat in our living room for hours, talking about Rebecca's fertility struggles and how she deserved to be a mother more than anyone else, while giving me pointed looks. This became a pattern. 3 or 4 times a week, they would show up unannounced. They would sit and talk about how unfair it was that some people got pregnant so easily while others struggled, clearly referring to me and Rebecca. If I tried to leave the room, Candace would call me rude and insensitive to Rebecca's pain. As my pregnancy progressed, Candace became increasingly controlling. She insisted on coming to all my doctor's appointments, claiming she wanted to support me. During these visits, she would constantly question my doctor's decisions and try to make medical choices for me. She argued with my doctor about everything, from my diet plan to my exercise routine to my birthing plan. She even tried to convince me to her friend Dr. Anderson, who was an ABGYN. When I refused, she went behind my back and made an appointment with Dr. Anderson anyway, then tried to guilt me into going by saying I was being difficult and ungrateful for her help. James always stood up for me, telling his mother to back off and respect our boundaries. But Candace would brush him off, saying he was being manipulated by me and that she was just trying to ensure a healthy pregnancy. She would often call him privately and tell him I was being overly sensitive and that he needed to control me better. The situation got worse when Rebecca had another failed IVF attempt in my 7th month. Candace came to our house that evening and started screaming at me, saying I was flaunting my pregnancy in Rebecca's face, and that I was being insensitive by posting pregnancy updates on social media. She demanded I stop posting anything pregnancy-related because it was hurting Rebecca. James and I decided to distance ourselves from them both after that incident. We stopped answering their calls and banned them from coming to our house unannounced. This led to Candace spreading rumors in the family about how I was keeping her son away from her and turning him against his family. When I went into labor, things took a dark turn. I had specifically told the hospital not to allow anyone except James in the delivery room. I had even filled out forms specifying this. However, Candace somehow convinced the staff she was my mother and got in. I was in too much pain to protest, and James was too focused on me to deal with her. The last thing I remember before passing out from exhaustion was Candace hovering near my baby. When I woke up, a doctor told me my baby hadn't survived. I was devastated. James was crying uncontrollably. But something felt off about the whole situation. Candace was eerily calm, almost relieved. She kept saying things like everything happens for a reason, and maybe this was a sign I wasn't ready to be a mother. She even suggested that this was nature's way of showing that Rebecca deserved a baby more than me. Phil Mark arrived at the hospital and his reaction to the news was strange too. He kept looking at Candace suspiciously. I later found out that he had overheard her having mysterious phone calls in the weeks leading up to my delivery, but he hadn't thought much of it then. The hospital staff acted weird too. One nurse, Sarah, seemed particularly nervous around us. She would start to say something but then stop herself. When I asked to see my baby one last time, Candace quickly interrupted, saying it would be too traumatic for me. She had the baby taken away before I could protest. I was discharged from the hospital, completely broken. James and I were trying to process our loss when Rebecca suddenly announced she had adopted a newborn. The timing was suspicious, just 2 days after my delivery. When we went to see the baby, Candace was there, acting overly protective of both Rebecca and the baby. She wouldn't let me hold the baby, saying I might be too emotional, given my recent loss. That's where things stand now. Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation, but I can't put my finger on it. James is devastated, but suspicious too. Phil Mark keeps giving Candace strange looks. The nurse Sarah seems to want to tell us something but appears scared. Am I crazy for thinking something is seriously wrong here? Update 1: The truth came out yesterday, and it's worse than anything we could have imagined. Sarah, the nurse who had been acting strange during our hospital stay, finally revealed everything. She showed up at our house around midnight, visibly shaking and crying. James initially didn't want to let her in, given everything we were going through, but something about her desperate state made us listen. She sat on our couch, trembling and barely able to speak. After we got her some water, she started telling us the horrifying truth. According to Sarah, Candace had approached her about 2 months before my due date. She had cornered Sarah in the hospital parking lot late one night after her shift. Initially, Candace just talked about Rebecca's fertility struggles, trying to gain Sarah's sympathy. Then she started showing up at the hospital cafe during Sarah's breaks, always steering the conversation towards pregnancy and childbirth. One day, Candace finally revealed her real intention. She offered Sarah $50,000 to help swap my baby with a stillborn infant from the hospital. She had already identified a potential stillborn. She had been monitoring recent cases at the hospital through her connections. Her plan was to take my healthy baby and give it to Rebecca, while giving me the stillborn baby. Sarah admitted she initially refused, horrified by the suggestion. But Candace didn't give up. She started threatening Sarah, saying she knew about a mistake Sarah had made years ago that could cost her nursing license. Sarah never told us what this mistake was, but it was clearly serious enough to make her vulnerable to blackmail. Under pressure, Sarah agreed. Candace had planned everything meticulously. She had even timed it perfectly. She knew there was a stillbirth case expected the same day as my delivery. She used her influence. Her family apparently donated large sums to the hospital to ensure Sarah would be assigned to both cases. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah showed us proof: text messages between her and Candace discussing the plan, a copy of the wire transfer Candace had made to her account, and even a recorded conversation where Candace detailed how they would execute the swap. Sarah revealed that Rebecca wasn't an innocent victim in this either. She had been part of the plan from the start. The adoption story was just a cover. They had even paid off someone to create fake adoption papers. James immediately called the police. While we waited for them to arrive, Sarah told us more details. Apparently, Candace had convinced Rebecca that this was her only chance at motherhood. She had manipulated Rebecca's desperation, telling her that I didn't deserve to be a mother as much as she did. The police arrived with child services at Rebecca's house around 2 a.m. Rebecca broke down the moment they confronted her. Through her tears, she admitted everything. She told them how Candace had convinced her that this was a victimless crime because I was young and could have more babies, while this was her last chance. My baby, my beautiful, healthy baby girl, was safely recovered and returned to us. The moment I held her in my arms, all the pain and confusion of the past 2 weeks melted away. She was perfect, and she was finally where she belonged. Phil Mark was there when we got our daughter back. He had rushed over as soon as James called him. The look of disgust on his face when he looked at Candace was something I'll never forget. He told her she was dead to him and that he was filing for divorce immediately. For the first time, I saw Candace's confident facade crack. But she still showed no real remorse. Even as the police were handcuffing her, she kept screaming that she did it for Rebecca, that Rebecca deserved a baby more than me. She kept saying she was just trying to help her niece have the family she deserved. We're pressing charges against all 3 of them: Candace, Rebecca, and Sarah. Despite Sarah coming clean, what she did was still criminal. She helped steal our baby and put us through 2 weeks of hell, thinking our child was dead. The hospital is conducting an internal investigation to see if any other staff members were involved. The hardest part was watching James process all this. Finding out that his own mother could do something so cruel, that she could put him through the pain of thinking his child was dead, just to help his cousin, it broke something in him. He hasn't spoken a word since they took Candace away. For now, we're focused on our daughter. The hospital arranged for a thorough checkup, and she's perfectly healthy. Phil Mark has been incredibly supportive, helping us with everything we need. He's as disgusted by Candace's actions as we are. We don't know what's going to happen next, but at least we have our baby back. The truth finally came out, and now everyone can see Candace and Rebecca for who they really are. Update 2: The legal proceedings have started, and more disturbing details keep emerging. Sarah agreed to testify against Candace and Rebecca in exchange for a lighter sentence. She provided investigators with extensive evidence, including recordings of conversations where Candace meticulously planned every detail of the baby swap. What's really shocking is what we discovered about Rebecca's role in all this. Initially, we thought she was just a desperate woman manipulated by Candace. But the investigation revealed she had been actively involved in planning the swap for months. She had even helped Candace bribe another hospital employee, a security guard who helped them access restricted areas and tamper with security footage. The investigators found a detailed journal in Rebecca's house. She had written down everything, from their initial planning meetings with Candace to her practice sessions for handling a newborn. She had even noted down potential answers for questions people might ask about the sudden adoption. Reading those entries made me sick to my stomach. She wrote about me like I was just an incubator, not a human being with feelings. Phil Mark's divorce from Candace was finalized last week. During the divorce proceedings, he discovered she had been systematically stealing money from their joint accounts to fund this scheme. She had taken nearly $200,000 over 6 months. The $50,000 she paid Sarah wasn't even the biggest bribe. She had paid the security guard $75,000 and had several other smaller payments to various people involved. The most devastating evidence came from Rebecca's phone. She had recorded herself practicing with a fake baby, preparing for questions people might ask about the sudden adoption. She had created an elaborate backstory about a fictional birth mother from another state who supposedly wanted a closed adoption. She had even gone as far as creating fake social media profiles to support this story. James is completely broken. Finding out that his cousin, who he grew up with and loved like a sister, could do this to us has destroyed him. They were inseparable as children. There are photos all over Phil Mark's house of them playing together, celebrating birthdays, going on family vacations. Now James can't even look at those pictures without feeling sick. He hasn't spoken to anyone from his family except his dad since this happened. We also found out that Candace had tried to do something similar with another patient at the hospital 2 weeks before my delivery. She had approached another nurse with the same offer, but that nurse had refused. If she had succeeded then, another family would have gone through what we did. The thought keeps me up at night. The police found forged adoption papers in Rebecca's house, professionally done. They had planned everything: fake birth certificates, adoption records, even medical history documents. If Sarah hadn't come forward, these papers would have made it nearly impossible for us to ever prove what really happened. During one of the court hearings, we learned that Rebecca had been taking prenatal vitamins and wearing a fake pregnancy belly around her house for weeks before getting my baby. She wanted to make it look like she had been pregnant all along in case any neighbors got suspicious. The level of preparation and deception is mind-boggling. The hardest part is seeing how this has affected our daughter. Even though she's just a baby, she gets anxious when strangers hold her. The child psychologist says it's probably because of the trauma of being separated from us during those crucial first 2 weeks. It breaks my heart to think about what she went through. The hospital's internal investigation revealed that at least 3 other staff members knew something wasn't right but stayed quiet. They've all been fired and are facing disciplinary action from the medical board. The hospital has also completely overhauled their security procedures. Some family members are still defending Candace and Rebecca, saying they just wanted to help create a family. They keep telling us we're being too harsh, that we should understand Rebecca's desperation to be a mother. These are the same people who watched me grieve for 2 weeks, thinking my baby was dead. We've cut contact with all of them. The trial is set to begin next month. Our lawyer says the evidence is overwhelming and they'll likely face significant prison time. But honestly, no punishment seems enough for what they put us through. How do you forgive someone for making you believe your baby died, while they were raising your child as their own, just across town? Update 3: The trials are finally over. The sentencing came down last week after months of hearings. Candace got 15 years in prison for orchestrating the whole thing. Rebecca got 10 years for her part in the scheme. Sarah, because she cooperated and helped us get our baby back, got 2 years with possibility of parole. The security guard who helped them got 5 years. During the sentencing, Candace showed no remorse. She stood up and gave a speech about how she was just trying to help her niece have the family she deserved. She actually told the judge that she would do it all again if she had to. The judge called her delusional and said she was lucky she wasn't getting more time. Rebecca's husband Mike filed for divorce after finding out the full extent of her involvement. He testified during the trial that he had no idea about any of this. He thought they were going through a legitimate adoption process. He wrote us a long letter apologizing, even though he wasn't involved. He's moving to another state to start fresh. Phil Mark has been incredibly supportive throughout all of this. He sold the house he shared with Candace and moved closer to us so he can spend time with his granddaughter. He's been amazing with her, and she absolutely adores him. It's heartbreaking watching him try to make up for what his wife did. Last week, we received a letter from Candace in prison. She wrote that she did what any good mother would do for their child, referring to Rebecca. She still believes she was right. She wrote about how Rebecca was meant to be a mother more than me, and that one day we would understand and forgive her. She even had the audacity to ask for pictures of our daughter. We burned the letter without responding. We decided to move to a different city after everything that happened. James got a transfer within his company, and I'm now working from home so I can spend more time with our daughter. She's doing much better now, the anxiety around strangers is slowly improving, and she's growing into such a happy, loving child. Phil Mark visits us regularly, but we've cut off all contact with everyone else from James's family. Many of them still defend Candace and Rebecca, saying they were just desperate to have a baby in the family. They keep trying to minimize what happened, calling it a misunderstanding or a mistake. These are the same people who watched us grieve for 2 weeks, knowing our baby was alive. Someone told us Candace is trying to appeal her sentence, claiming she was mentally unstable when she planned everything. Her lawyer is arguing that her obsession with giving Rebecca a baby clouded her judgment. We don't care anymore. We have our daughter, we have our truth, and we have each other. James still struggles with what his mother and cousin did, but he's focused on being the best father he can be. Sometimes I catch him just watching our daughter sleep, as if making sure she's really there. The betrayal cut deep, but it also showed us who truly loves us. We're just grateful our daughter is safe with us where she belongs. We've changed our phone numbers, moved to a new city, and started fresh. Some people have suggested therapy to help us process everything, but right now, we're just focusing on being happy with our little family of 3, for when Phil visits. The whole experience taught us that sometimes the people you trust the most can hurt you the worst. But it also showed us who truly loves us. We're building a new life now, far away from the toxicity and pain of the past.